Here we go with this one.
Of all the human species who have walked the earth, it is perhaps the Neanderthals that people are most fascinated by. Their likeness and close relationship to us has even led some to dub them as our sister species, and even their DNA can still be found within most of us to this day. While dates aren't clear, it is thought that this group of archaic humans inhabited parts of Eurasia between 400,000 and 40,000 years ago.
Are you calling them Neanderthals or Neanderthals? I'm having flashbacks to this German teacher I once had. Not for a German language class, just a teacher who happened to be German. And he was constantly correcting us to call them Neanderthals. After all this time, it never caught on for me, honestly. It sounds strange coming off of my tongue that way.
Most of this time falls under the Chibanian stage of the Pleistocene, a time when Eurasia was generally even colder than it is today, and filled with an abundance of megafauna that made life no walk in the park. Therefore, to survive and thrive in harsh conditions, Neanderthals evolved some of the most insane biology seen in any Homo species. And if alive today, some would most likely even consider them to be superhuman in a few senses. From afar, their anatomical differences to us would not be so obvious, with the likeliest contrasting feature being their height, as recovered specimens show that on average, Neanderthals were quite a bit smaller than modern humans, typically being 14 centimeters or 5.5 inches shorter than post-World War II populations. The tallest known Neanderthal specimen, dubbed a Mood 1, is believed to have been about 1.78 meters or 5 foot 10 inches tall, which really doesn't seem that tall, all things considered. However, when comparing Neanderthals to European populations of 20,000 years ago, we find that Neanderthals were actually equally as tall and if not slightly taller. So that's really all to say that we don't know how tall they could have been.
I was just about to say the opposite, that 5'10" for the tallest Neanderthal is way taller than I thought. But I'm not sure I understood what you said about the average there compared to World War II populations. Hold on. Neanderthal species vary in height from 4'10" to 5'10", or 147.5 to 177 cm, with the average being around 5'5" from what they found. And for comparison, the global average for males today is around 5'7.5", 171 cm. That sounds about right, depending on where you live. Countries like the Netherlands, Denmark, Estonia, Montenegro, Bosnia and Herzegovina have the tallest men, reporting the average male height to be around 6 feet. Wow, women in the Netherlands, 5'7". And then it looks like nations in South America and East Asia generally have shorter average heights. Yeah, height isn't the Neanderthal feature that stands out to me the most. It's that brow ridge, just that thick bone. And the short necks.
What's fascinating, though, is that despite being shorter than modern humans, Neanderthals were quite a bit heavier, with the average male having weighed up to 83 kilograms or 183 pounds,
Wow.
while the females usually hovered around 66 kilograms or 146 pounds.
They've got that stocky build.
Making them 20% heavier than the average Homo sapien. The reason behind this paradoxical sounding information is that Neanderthals had crazy robust skeletons that were much more compacted than our own, with virtually every single bone being thicker and heavier, with them sometimes even being twice the density. Their shoulders, femurs, chest, triceps, arms, and kneecaps were especially bulky, which are all signs that they were extremely powerful and muscular in life. And it is widely agreed upon that they were much stronger than us, a possible adaptation to their close-quarter hunting tactics that involved them using giant spears to take down medium and large-sized prey, which included various rhinos, horses, elephants, and of course, woolly mammoths, which were equivalent in size to African bush elephants, and sported thick coats of fur that made it that much harder to kill them. And speaking of African bush elephants, it's no secret that they're endangered just like their woolly cousins were before them.
I feel like every few years, there's news of yet another company trying to genetically engineer a woolly mammoth back to life. I don't know how long the extinction takes, but I've been hearing about that since I was a kid.
This widespread and presumably lifelong use of these spears is also what some researchers partially believe led to the distinct Popeye-like arms seen in many Neanderthal specimens that would have allowed them to wield weapons with ferocious intensity. The well-defined nature of their arms and overall muscular build was possibly also a sign of extreme levels of hormones, according to at least one study. Specifically, the researchers believe that Neanderthals were naturally pumped up with large amounts of hormones that added to their increased muscle mass and provided them with the ability to pull off some pretty crazy feats of strength, such as lugging up to 50 pounds or 27 kilograms of meat for 30 miles or 48 kilometers,
Wow.
the same distance as walking 138 laps around a soccer field.
If that illustration is anywhere near the muscle mass of a real Neanderthal, that is insane. And all natural. No supplements, no protein powder, no gym. Surviving life is the workout. I bet the hunting alone was probably a full body workout. Intense cardio, sprinting, carrying the equipment, and then carrying the animal back when they get a kill for, how long did he say? 48 kilometers. On foot. Barefoot.
What's more is that thanks to their larger chests, shoulders, and triceps, scientists assume that Neanderthals would have been pretty great wrestlers and powerlifters if still around, with males possibly being able to bench press 500 pounds or 200 kilograms without training, while the females could have done 350 pounds or 160 kilos. For a little bit of context, just 2/3 of this weight would have been considered elite levels by our own standard.
I just imagine myself even attempting to bench press 350. My arms would be like little wet noodles, just shaking. It would really be the spotter doing all the heavy lifting, let's be real. The average Neanderthal woman was a beast. He was showing clips of Eddie Hall, and I don't know if you've ever seen the video where he's deadlifting 500 kg. But he's a human outlier. Most people on the planet can't lift that. Now imagine how jacked the Neanderthal outlier must have been. The one who was intentionally trying to get stronger, or even the one who just had to do more manual labor than the others.
Their short, bulky builds played a big role in this strength too, but it wasn't only power that they gained from their robustness, as it bestowed upon them incredible durability as well. A nice touch to complement the brutally hard lives that many Neanderthals endured. In fact, a systemic analysis on recovered skeletons found that between 79 and 94% showed signs of extreme trauma that had fully healed. These injuries ranged from blunt force fractures all the way to traumatic amputations, with a particularly gruesome case involving an elderly Neanderthal, who during his younger years had lost his right arm, damaged his left clavicle, was smashed so badly in the face that he was blinded in one eye, and had ears so banged up that the ear canals themselves were shut off by new bony material that had grown after repeated injury, rendering him deaf in both ears.
One eye, deaf, blind, smashed clavicle, and still somehow survived to an elderly age, which has to be somewhere around 30s, 40s for Neanderthal. That's crazy.
The high degree of damage seen in Neanderthal specimens is thought to have come from a mix of their aggressive face-to-face hunting technique, interpersonal conflicts, and animal attacks, the latter of which actually seems to have been a common occurrence, as nearly 74% of Neanderthals, based on one study, reflected evidence of having survived violent animal encounters, with 21% having been with big cats, 17% with wolves, and 36% with bears. The most hardcore part of all of this is that scientists do not think that these animal attacks were predation attempts, rather the opposite, that the animals had been defending themselves during Neanderthal attacks. Talk about hardcore.
Nearly 3 in 4 Neanderthals have had some type of violent altercation with an animal. And I don't know what's worse, wolves, big cats, or bears. You probably have the best chance with the wolf. But I have no problem seeing why their life expectancy was so low.
And to really drive this home, even their skin was designed for battle, as genes found in Neanderthals are associated with thickened skin, nails, and hair that theoretically help them cope with getting banged up and enduring the cold. And yet another adaptation that seemed to benefit their rough lifestyle were large joints that allowed them to perform strenuous movement that would have been extremely hard or nearly impossible for a Homo sapien to do. And while not necessarily larger, Neanderthal hands were also much different from our own, with their fingertips being broader and their thumbs sticking out at a much wider angle, which likely affected the way they gripped objects. And to some, their hand shape possibly meant a reduction in precision capabilities, which they made up for though by powerfully gripping their items and weapons. So clearly, Neanderthals were absolute units on the outside, but they were pretty crazy on the inside too, with one of the more obvious signs being their barreled chests, which accommodated a wider rib cage and larger lungs, with studies finding that on average, Neanderthals had a lung capacity 20% greater than our own. Yet, this number widely varies, and some exceptional Neanderthals have us beaten even more badly in this area, as best demonstrated by Kabara II, a male whose lungs can most likely hold 9 liters of air, which is 40% greater than the capacity of the average modern man's lungs. And to make this even more impressive, keep in mind that until recently, the largest lung capacity ever recorded in an athlete was only 8.5 liters.
I didn't know barreled chests generally means higher lung capacity. I thought you get that from having asthma. Could be completely wrong there. Maybe you can be born with it. I always thought Mike Tyson had a barreled chest, but maybe that's just wide.
Neanderthals' noses further supported this notion that they gobbled up air, as they were quite long and wide, which helped them move air faster, as in 100% faster than what's seen by any man or woman today. The need for speed, through their noses and their ridiculous lung capacity, is thought to have been an adaptation to support their heavier bodies and to help them survive in the colder climates. Since animals who do live in the cold, Neanderthals included, typically evolve faster metabolic rates to compensate for the rate of heat loss that they experience. This is then, of course, reflected by their energy requirements as well, as in the case of Neanderthals, it's believed that an individual needed between 4,500 and 6,700 calories every single day. So, if they were still alive, you could expect food items to have two completely separate nutrition labels, distinguishing between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals.
I'm stopping this one a lot, so I'll make sure to add the video in the description as always so you can watch it without my commentary. But what are the odds they're even getting enough calories a day? If you have to hunt for your food, which is already so inconsistent, days that you don't get anything, you just don't eat enough. We'll say you don't eat enough because surely they had other foods. But even days you're getting something, you have to share between the people in your group. And I'm sure winters were also hard to hunt. Plus Homo sapiens were also out there competing for the exact same resources, and they needed less to survive.
The bulky nature of their noses seems to have helped directly with the cold as well, since more room in the nasal cavity would have helped to heat and humidify the cold, dry air that was coming in. Now, because Neanderthals breathed like champs, you may be thinking that they were exceptional long-distance runners, who could tire their prey to complete exhaustion, much like what is seen in modern humans. However, on the contrary, Neanderthals were surprisingly poor endurance animals, who were instead built for bursts of speed. And there's actually more than one biological trait that points to this, one example being their toes, which were fairly long and wide, allowing them to stay in contact with the floor for a longer period, and thus allowing them to generate more power and faster starts. Not to mention that their leg bones were quite short, something that's not usually seen in endurance athletes of today, who typically have longer legs to increase each stride. Even their Achilles tendons were not designed for distance, having been long and narrow, making them not the best at storing energy needed for longer runs. And this is once again in contrary to endurance athletes, who almost always have stiff, short, and wide Achilles tendons. And yet, while their lower extremities were the most blatant signs of speed over stamina, the true proof in the pudding came from something unseen to the naked eye: their muscle fibers. As you may know, especially if you've done a 23andMe, humans have differing types of muscle fibers that each specialize in a certain level of power generation to stamina ratio. For example, someone can have a higher ratio of fast twitch or slow twitch muscle fibers, the former of which helps to generate bursts of energy, while the latter can possibly help people perform better and longer lasting activities, such as endurance running. In modern humans, these fibers are mixed, and this was also the case in Neanderthals, but they typically had a way higher concentration of these fast twitch muscle fibers than we do, a likely adaptation for their hunting style, which required quick bursts of speed to get close and personal with their prey. This also means that if for whatever reason if Neanderthals came back, be sure to challenge one to a marathon instead of a sprint, to at least give yourself the best shot of winning. All this power and speed no doubt gave them quite a lot of brawn, but interestingly enough, they were also a lot of brain as well, as they had freakishly large brain cases. On average, the male brain cases tended to be 1,640 cubic centimeters, and in the woman it was usually around 1,460 cubic centimeters, which makes them about 30% bigger than what's seen in contemporary humans. Now, pure size alone does not paint the full story of intelligence, but their huge brains were a good sign that they were at least far more intelligent than first thought. And today, it's widely believed that Neanderthals could perform a whole host of complex tasks, such as coordinating hunts, making tools, creating arts, taking exceptional care of the sick, and, of course, communicating.
I was definitely sold the myth that Neanderthals weren't very smart at all. Well, literally, calling somebody a Neanderthal could be used as an insult. There's that dumb caveman trope. The lies.
Yet, despite the size of their brains, researchers do not necessarily think that Neanderthals had superior mental prowess compared to us, as their brains were also structurally different than ours. having a more circular bomb-like shape that had to operate a large body, and devoted larger areas to certain senses, such as smell and eyesight, as their occipital lobes were relatively huge. And their eyesight is actually what some scientists think is to blame for the massive brains, as Neanderthals also had unusually big eyes, which would have required much more brain power to process what they were seeing. Of course, though, no one has ever found an intact Neanderthal eye, but based on the size and shape of their eye sockets, it is estimated that they were about 15% larger than our own, which would have helped them see a lot better and sharper than we do, while also giving them better night vision. These eyes, in conjunction with their big brains and large noses, gave Neanderthals some pretty sizable heads and skulls that might have led to their sturdy thick necks, seeing that they had to be able to support such giant noggins.
That's not much of a neck at all. It's just hunched shoulders into back of head.
Furthermore, their heads, relative to ours, were not just bigger, but more elongated and forward projecting as well. And unsurprisingly, their other facial features were supersized too, including the jaw and teeth. It was originally thought that their thick wide jaws and sturdy chompers were an indication of an insane bite force that would have let them gnaw on bones, tough meat, and a variety of abrasive foods. However, subsequent studies revealed a bite force not far from our own, with it being comparable to the bites seen in the upper range of modern humans, and would have registered at around 700 newtons. So that's to say, while it would hurt a lot to be bit, it would most likely not cause any catastrophic wounds, at least most of the time. This does call into question though, why did they have such large mouths and teeth if not for a strong bite? And one interesting idea claims that the answer is that the jaw was simply widened in order to accommodate the teeth themselves, which had essentially evolved to be a third hand. To be exact, a group of researchers believe that Neanderthals would have used their teeth to grip and manipulate different items, thus freeing up both of their hands for other uses.
No.
And there is some evidence that backs this, as besides being grippy in structure and nature, Neanderthal dentition have wear and tear patterns to the front that don't really align with eating or chewing.
No, my teeth could never.
It is only found in Neanderthals, suggesting that they bit objects with their front teeth quite a lot. The bulky nature of each tooth may have also been an important part in processing their diets, which we know based on isotopic analysis consisted of large amounts of meat. So much so, in fact, that they are considered to have been hypercarnivores. In other words, 70% of their huge caloric need came from meat alone. At this point, I wouldn't blame you for thinking Neanderthals were quite funky and different compared to us. And you may be wondering what impact this has on you if you're one of the many with Neanderthal DNA. For example, if it means super strength or a voracious appetite for meat. Well, simply put, nearly every study on the matter so far has not yielded any significant results. And most maintain that Neanderthal DNA usually only has subtle effects on athletic feats and physical appearances. Although, there is a growing list of studies that suggest that their DNA may have had greater impacts on our internal systems than we once thought. That being said, many of these studies have conflicted with each other, and there is a lot of disagreement in general on just how impactful Neanderthal DNA really is. But what no one is in disagreement with is just how amazing these extinct humans were. Thanks for watching, and until next time on ExtinctZoo.
That was great. You're going to find the ExtinctZoo channel in the description, along with this particular video. I wonder what it was like socially when Neanderthals and Homo sapiens were interbreeding, because there were those physical differences, so they probably each knew the other was different. I wonder if they found any groups mixed with Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. I've got questions. Parts of this made me think of that show Naked and Afraid. It's the closest I can think of 21st century humans attempting to live how Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens did. For those who've never seen it, it's a survival show where typically two people are dropped in the wild, whether that be in the snow, in the desert, jungle, mountains, with no clothes, and each person gets one survival tool, and they attempt to survive for a few weeks. So they hunt their own food, or they don't eat, build fire, make shelter, just naked, in the elements. But a lot of the illustrations he showed were Neanderthals in cold temperatures, and in Naked and Afraid, whenever they go to those sub-freezing temperatures, it looks so unnatural for a human. Even when the producers have to step in and give them animal hides or pelts to keep warm. Meanwhile, all Neanderthals had were animal hides and pelts to keep warm. Absolute specimens. I don't envy living during this time at all, though. Anyway, leave your thoughts. It was not easy to find music on theme today, not gonna lie. I was just on my liked songs typing in keywords, which ended up working. So if you can think of any music that has anything to do with anything we spoke about today, please feel free to add it down below. As always, any genre, any language. I'm gonna start with Bonobo and his song Sapiens. And this is an English producer slash DJ. I'm not too sure what we would call this genre, but if smooth drum and bass were a thing, this is what it would be. It's very chill, no lyrics, which is kind of like the next one from 13th Ward Social Club. And the song is Denisovan, or Denisovan. Word stress makes all the difference. I don't know where to put that one. But if I were making a playlist, I'd put this song and the previous one on the same list. Perhaps even right after another, if that tells you anything. It's instrumental, sometimes soulful. It's not easy to find information on this artist. If you know and like Menahan's Street Band, you may like 13th Ward Social Club. And there's also a band called Caveman. I have a song from them called In the City, and this is just straight indie rock from Brooklyn. And we can also throw in Mother Nature by The Temptations. And that's just all I have. This one's called The World Before Us. I never remember subtitles. So, it's on the screen right now, by Tom Higham. This was recommended to me, I want to say a year ago, from a subscriber on Patreon. I don't even know what video we were watching then, but I remember thinking, okay, the book is fairly new. It came out in the 2020s. And it's essentially this investigation of other human species and then the modern day regions that they're from. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis. I'm blanking on the other species. Homo erectus is also in there. It's very science forward. It collects confirmed discoveries archaeologists have made, and then also explores theory and possibilities as to why they died out, how they lived. All around well-researched book without being dry. And I've never read another book on a subject anywhere near this, so if you have that you'd like to recommend, please feel free to do that. And that's all for today. So thank you for watching this one with me, and I'll see you next time.